Wait, stop. That's the one. Welcome to ZEN TENN Speaks, a show where I make new friends and reconnect with old ones. A show where everyone's stories may inspire you to tell your own story. In this podcast, we encourage everyone to get rid of shame, guilt, fear, doubt, and judgments for themselves and for others, and replace those with love, empathy, compassion, understanding, kindness, and to do your best in everything that you do. In essence, to get rid of things that no longer serve your well being, to be true to yourself and be honest with others. No need to be politically correct. That's out the window with 2020. Here, we tell the raw, uncensored story, your story, and tell the truth as you see it. Make sure you live your fulfilled life without permission or apologies. So, if you have a juicy, interesting, raw, unapologetic story and inspiring, please make sure to contact me at zentenn21@gmail.com. It is ZENTENN21@gmail.com. Or you can find me on most social media platforms. You know it. The IG, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, OnlyFans. I mean, not really. But yes, OnlyFans. Just kidding. Not. As you may guessed it, my name is Zen, and welcome to the show. Today we have a guest. Our guest today is Swaya. Swaya has been a clinical psychotherapist since 1987. He has been counseling many single individuals, including couples, to overcome depression, anxiety, addiction, including sexual addiction, internet addiction, and eating disorders. Ed's mentorship can enhance one's well-being. So his work can be found at edswaya.com. Ed also is an author of the Sex, Death, and Tantra, How Sex Changed My Life After Death. His book can also be found on Amazon, which I'll post a link in the description below. So he was compelled to write the book after his husband, Zachary, of 15 years, was killed by a car. And Sex, Death, and Tantra is not only a story about love and loss, but one optimism and healing. I'm very curious to hear Ed's story. So thank you, Ed, for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Definitely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. So tell us a bit about who you are and what brings you joy.
What brings me joy? Okay. Let's see. I am a parent. I have a 19-year-old daughter. That's been a fun journey. Adopted her when she was born. And that's also a theme in the book as well, how she fits into this. I am a psychologist, a psychotherapist in private practice up in Seattle, Washington. That brings me joy. I am married again to a lovely man, and that relationship brings me joy. And right now I am vacationing in Palm Springs, and so sun and pool and food and drink give me some joy this week and some time off. So I'm enjoying that as well.
Well, thank you so much for spending our time with us in your vacation. I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So how has your journey of counseling others been?
It's been really good. I started as a high school teacher, but working in a school where we got the kids that the conventional classrooms didn't know what to do with. And those kids ended up being mostly high or drunk and from dysfunctional families. And so we didn't know what to do with them. And then we started learning about how to create a school program that was half counseling and half teaching. And we did that for a couple of years. And I found that I liked the counseling part better than I did the teaching part. So that's when I got my master's in counseling. And then for some reason, I don't know, I really can't remember how or why. I've always been interested in the marriage of sex and spirituality. And Tantra was the marriage of sex and spirituality. And for years, everything I read about it was always about males melding with females, and everything was just about male and female sex. And that, as a gay man, that did not speak to me. And so I was just frustrated. And then all of a sudden, I found somebody in Seattle that was teaching Tantra to queer men and queer women. And my late husband and I started to study with him for about a year before he was killed, but when he was hit by this car and killed when he was walking our dog. So that, and then it was the year after that that I did this incredible journey with my teacher around using erotic practices and sex and sexuality to heal from the traumatic loss of my husband.
Wow. So what joy has it brought to the people that you counsel, if they give you any feedback?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them or, too much, but people say their lives they have more options, more choice, more freedom in their lives. And that is, for me, the goal of counseling. As it's also to clean up whatever's going on inside of your brain and body around, so you have more options in your life. So psychotherapy and Tantra sit very well together, doing both of those things. So I think people have experienced more freedom, a little less constriction by pain, and they have more options in their lives.
Wow. So tell us the process of writing your book, Sex, Death, and Tantra, How Sex Changed My Life After Death.
The title is actually How Sex Saved My Life After Death. Not changed, it's how it saved my life, because I credit this work with saving my life after my husband was killed. The writing process, well, this was such an interesting journey, and so many, many of my friends did not understand how I could be delving into eroticism and sexuality so soon after my husband was killed. And some people didn't understand that, some people did understand that. So it was just very clear to me that this story has never been told before, and that's what propelled me. I'm not like to write, but I'm not a writer. I guess I am a writer now. I wrote a book, for God's sakes. But that's the first big piece of writing I've done, and I just knew that I wanted to tell the story because that work, this journey I took, I credit with saving my life after this sudden traumatic loss of my husband of 15 years. And then I became a single parent at the same moment, and it was just overwhelming and obviously the worst thing I would ever experienced. And this journey, I think, threw me a life preserver that I needed.
So can you tell the audience kind of like a little summary of the sex part, the death part, and the Tantra? What are the connections? It sounds like a trilogy.
Well, most people, when they hear Tantra, think of sex. So Tantra is about, you can have great sex as part of Tantra, but some part of Tantra is also just about, psychology and meditation and movement and nutrition and all those things. But sex is definitely a way in which it's a shortcut to get into your body, to be present in your body. The death part of the book is Zachary's death, of how that.
After his death, like, how did you cope? Or were you using the skills to help you cope along, or did it take time to cope?
It took time. I mean, the first probably month or 6 weeks after his death. All my Tantra teacher could do with me is hold me as I cried. I just cried and cried enough to be able to get my daughter awake and get her to school, and came back and cried. I couldn't work. I didn't see clients for 6 months. And at 6 months, I very slowly took the next 6 months to rebuild my practice and go back to full time. But I didn't, I couldn't work. It was really just enough to get myself awake and being able to parent a 6.5-year-old child who was grieving also, and just taking care of our house and the two of us and keeping us going. Um, so it was, again, Zachary and I studied the year before he died. And so there's a lot about what we learned, what we discovered about ourselves psychologically and erotically and all that stuff in that year prior to his death. And then the night he died, I was in the hospital, was my Tantra teacher, and he came up to the hospital, and we just sort of started this journey together. And again, the first 6 weeks were really just him holding me while I cried and cried. And then very, very, very slowly, we started engaging erotically and using the skills and the principles and practices that we learned the year prior to see how we could bring those to bear to my grief.
Wow. So you mentioned the kind of like misconception of Tantra. Can you give someone who have that different idea of Tantra, can you give an explanation of how you think you can change their minds about what Tantra actually is?
This is where I say you have to read my book. Well, if you Google Tantra, you will find, again, mostly heterosexual Tantra referenced, with the women with long flowy hair and the backlighting, and it looks like it's very spiritual, and it's got all the trappings of spirituality, but there are as many ways of practicing Tantra as there are people. Everyone's got a different lineage. The lineage I studied was from actually a psychiatrist who lived in India for 30 years and studied, and we've got a whole lineage that goes back. But this is a very different lineage of Tantra than another friend of mine has studied for her whole life, but hers is not very sexual. Hers is very internally marrying the masculine and feminine energies inside of her. That's the way she describes it. In my book, I don't like using the terms masculine and feminine for energy, because to me, energy is not gendered. There is yin energy, there's yang energy, that works, but it is not, I think, when we gender energy or behavior or actions in terms of that's masculine behavior, that's feminine behavior, I think that gets us into a place that I'm not comfortable going, because I don't think that stuff is served well by being gendered.
Right. Totally makes sense. I agree. How has Tantra transformed your life?
It has allowed me to be more present in my body. It has deepened my meditation practice. It has brought me to be back into my body and in my life in a very solid way after I felt like I got kicked in the stomach and kicked in the heart by his death. So it's really changed my life in terms of that. Another way it did, because of the sex part, is it has allowed me to really work on any shame around sex. So many of us carry around shame about any kind of sex that we like or fantasize about, and it's really helped me to, like, no, just try everything and see what speaks to you, and see what turns you on psychologically, physically, spiritually, and pursue that. So that's some of the ways it's really changed my life.
So would you recommend, is it recommended to everyone or a specific type of people psychologically?
Well, that's a really good question. In my lineage, we don't teach people who are who are under 40, because we really want people to be solidly in their lives and leading a good life. People who are, more trying to figure things out, or haven't really learned how to be in their lives in a way that makes sense to them. It's the energies generated through the erotic practices can be too much and short circuit people. So we really want people to have learned how to be in the world, how to take care of themselves. If they're interested in having families, how to raise families, how to just be in the world. Then you can look at how to let some of that stuff go and experience wider forms of pleasure and things like that. But in general, this lineage doesn't teach people who are under 40.
Okay. And who can you select specific people for Tantra activities? First of all, can you do it by yourself? And can your partner be just anybody?
So yes, you can do it yourself. It's for me one of the simplest ways to describe the sexual practices is, how do you move that when you masturbate, you're generating sexual energy by yourself. And when you're with a partner, you're generating sexual energy, and often that's using our genitals and whatever else we like. Some people, it's their elbows, their ears, their nipples, whatever. But how do you take that sexual energy and be able to move it in your body? How do you move it up and down the chakra system of your body? Because that's where some of the magic can happen. And you can do that in a solo practice. People, again, that friend of mine, her practices are solo. They're not with people. That I mentioned her earlier. You can't, when I'm sexual with a stranger, with my partner, with whomever, I am practicing Tantra because I'm moving that sexual energy around in ways that isn't visible. If you look at me through the window having sex, you'd be like, oh, he's having sex. But what's going on in my body is very different. It's really about taking that erotic energy and moving it up my system and out my crown chakra or down the chakra system and into the ground. And so it's something that you can't see if you're just looking at me through the window, but is happening inside of me. And so I'm not like I don't select you come teach with me, you come study with me. It's more like, if we're having sex, this is what I'm doing. And if someone's interested, I'm happy to play with them. But it's not like you do a move here and a move here and a breath here and ta-da, you have the 4-hour orgasms people talk about. That's not how it works. It's really, it's a practice. You keep practicing and practicing, and you hold more and more erotic energy in your body.
All right. So can you tell us more about your psychotherapist practice? So when you counsel couples, does your book relate to your work as well, or do you teach people Tantra as well, or you just do your?
Well, because I'm a licensed psychotherapist, I don't do any erotic work, any hands-on erotic work in my practice. What I can do is coach you. If it's a couple, like, hey, you two could go home and try this. But also one of the principles of my lineage of Tantra is that everything is an experiment. And that sounds like such a simple principle, right? But what it teaches us, and the more we do it, the more profound it gets, is that there is no right and wrong answer to anything. Everything we do is an experiment. As I told you, I'm on vacation this week. So I'm doing an experiment of coming inside at 3:00 from the pool, putting on clothes, and having this meeting with you. That's an experiment. And you and I will both get data from this experiment. We'll see, was that a good idea? Oh my God, it was a disaster. He was boring, he was, whatever. But we get to get data. There's no right or wrong answer to it. And so we do experiments. So I teach that a lot in my therapy practice, which is everyone's like, I want to figure out what the healthy thing is to do here. I want to figure out what the right thing to do, what the best thing to do. And I always say, there isn't a right thing to do. There isn't a best thing. There isn't a healthy thing. It's what experience do you want? If you want to have the experience of not speaking to your partner for 3 days, don't speak to him, but you're going to get data from that. Does it bring you closer? Does it bring you further away? Does it make the home better? Does it make you feel like you want to be more close? I mean, you get data from it. There's not a healthy way to do things. And so this really allows people to, okay, what experiences do I want? What do I want to try? What do I want to learn about? I want to try to learn to fight with you differently. I want to try to learn to fight without yelling at you. Let's see how that goes. I mean, I just scream at you and just try that and see if that gets me to be heard and understood more. So everything's an experiment. And I really coach people to say, what do you want to learn? How do you want your life to be? So that's some of how I use one of the principles of Tantra in my psychotherapy practice.
Nice. And I like, from what I get from that is there's not one way to keep doing things with different people, because everyone will have a different ways of dealing with.
Right.
Also, the way you deal with life every day or different circumstances will have different ways. So if you're just stuck in one kind of, let's say if you have a list of what to do for that day and it's different, then you're just gonna be thrown off. So you have to go through the flow and live in the present. That's awesome. So I've never experienced I have not experienced death in my immediate family or life yet. So anyone, what would you tell someone who has a spouse or a child or anyone that's died in their family or even a friend? What did you go through that you didn't know before the death, and after the death you see in hindsight?
So there's one thing that I did my master's degree in grief and loss. So this is what I studied in my graduate program to be a therapist. And it's something I never read about and didn't know. But when my husband died, every relationship in my life changed. Some people who were super, super close drifted away. Some people who were surprisingly just sort of on the outskirts of my life came closer and surprised me. And I've talked to people who've experienced death with a spouse, and they've experienced the same thing. It's like every relationship changes, and when they're changing, it's really hard. But if you can just go with it and see where it takes you, because I don't want to force anyone to be close to me if they don't want to be. I don't want to force anyone to go away if they want to be close, or whatever. Right. So, but every relationship changes, and that was the surprise that I didn't know, even though I studied grief and loss in my graduate program.
And I've read some books and listened to some podcasts where people say, especially a death of a child, they talked about the most, that you never stop grieving. That's a thing?
That's a thing. I've not, knock wood, lost a child, and I think that is the worst thing that one could ever experience. But it is, I'm not grieving every day. I'm not crying. I'm not even crying at all, but there are some times I went back to the house where Zachary and I lived after I hadn't been there for 12 years. And it was just, I wasn't crying, but it was like, oh, I'm having all these memories, and it's a different way of grieving. Again, not gut wrenching, not snot dripping, crying sad, but oh, right, I remember that life and how different that life is from today's life. So I think that is true. I don't know that you ever stop grieving. Zachary and I had a daughter together, and so when she went off to college, I was like, oh, that's something he missed. And when she started high school, I said that. And so I think at those milestones, I'll always be aware that, oh, he's not been around for this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm curious about, since you became a widow or single parent, did you date again? I mean, you did it again because you're married currently, but how
Correct.
soon did it happen? Or did you have to date many people first? Or the current person you're dating now is the guy, the person, or how
No, it
did that?
took me a while. It took me a while to find this guy. I started dating a year and a half, maybe after Zachary died, one of my first couple of dates, and I really was single for about 7 years after that, and I wasn't expecting to be. I've always enjoyed being in a relationship, and always that was just an easy place for me to be, but it just didn't happen. I dated and met plenty of men, and but that I was frustrated. I was a fundraiser for Lambda Legal. That's the gay and lesbian volunteer attorney organization. And I met him and we started dating, went really slowly. And that was about 4 years ago. And we just got married a couple months ago. So that was, thank you. So yeah, but it took me probably a year and a half before I could even think about going on a date. Then I've had just a couple of short relationships in the interim, but nothing stuck. Well, of course, I want everyone to buy my book, but I think particularly for gay men, although other straight women have read it and have told me really it's affected them very well, very positively. But if you're interested in bringing more consciousness to your sexual play, more pleasure to your sexual lives, and wondering how sexual pleasure interfaces with psychological well-being, this book goes into all that. And I'm hoping to, assuming that COVID can settle down here a bit, hoping to gather people in person for hands-on workshops like I describe in the book, that are clothes off workshops, many of them, and prescribed erotic activities together, and actually fun and learning, and sexy times, and psychologically challenging times. And so I guess I would say Tantra is not what you think it is. And if you want my story, which I think is interesting, of how I took me a while to find gay Tantra, and then studied that with my husband for a year. Then he died suddenly. And then the next year of my life, of how, using all that I learned, and did this wild journey with my Tantra teacher to explore the depths of my grief, and sort of the depths of how I can bring pleasure to the parts of me that were broken. So that's the part I want people to get, is you can use pleasure to heal.
Nice.
And the other thing is that in this culture, I can't think of any organization, any family, anybody that says to trust your pleasure, trust what you want. Everyone says, be careful of what you want, be careful of desire. Desire, it's the devil's work. It's your id, it's your id run wild. It's like, trust pleasure and trust your desire, because it'll take you to pretty amazing places. So that's what I would say.
And I'm very glad that you saw that there was something missing in the market for gay men. Basically, you created something that they can use, instead of just like the prescribed straight relationship, male and female. So that's
right.
So
Because there's very little written for gay men about Tantra, about conscious sexuality, and there's nothing really written for using sex to heal from psychological stuff and pain and grief. So if you're curious about that journey, if you're just curious about a sexual journey that is probably unlike anything you've read about, this book would be something that you might find interesting.
So where can someone buy the book?
If you take the title in, any bookstore will order it for you. It's available on Amazon. It's available on any of the online booksellers. So you can find it there. I always want to give a shout out to local bookstores, so support them, but they can order it for you. But if you're like many of us, a click online is easy to do, and people do that, and it'll be in your mailbox in a couple days.
And how
So
can someone listening to this who's in your area, or do you do things online as well? Can they reach out to you to get
they can
a
reach out on in the back cover of my book. There's an email address for me, and I check it every day. It's sexdeathandtantra@gmail.com. Sexdeathandtantra@gmail. And I'm hoping to do, as I say, in person, weekend long, or explore this with other men. And that's the plan for spring. Again, hoping that the crazy pandemic we're in settles down a bit and we can safely gather to do that. That's the plan. Yeah.
Great.
Trust your pleasure, trust your desire. That's what I would add. Yeah.
Yes, and your pleasure and your desire are not shameful, and
Right.
just trust your intuition and do what feels good, and what is you'll know what feels good in your heart. So
Yes. Yep.
yeah. And everyone, make sure you go to edswaya.com, and I'll have the link on the description below. And thank you again, Ed, for being here today to talk about your book.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thank you. I appreciate
You
your time.
too. All right. Bye-bye.